Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the Israel Association of Writers in English. As most of you know, this IAWE was established in 1980 to promote writing in English in Israel and to act as a bridge between Israel and the world. We publish an annual journal, ARC, and number 31 is due out this week, this month. This week. We also try to keep in touch with a newsletter that's edited by David Bronner and frequent events, lately on Zoom, where we read each other's work or we invite guests as we do tonight. In the past 15 months, this attempt to communicate with each other and the rest of the world has become more important and more difficult. As writers in Israel have often been moved to silence by the shock of events and emotions occurring here in Israel and the lack of connection with the world outside. So we're particularly pleased today, to welcome Erika Dreifus, who will be presented and interviewed by Anne Bardov. Anne has been one of the people responsible for keeping up communications in these trying times in the events committee. I'm Karen Alkalay-Gut, and although chair of the IAWE, I am technologically challenged, and this is going to be a big event for me. Please help me out by keeping yourself on mute. And if you have questions, put them in the chat. And afterwards, if we have time, we will get to them. But save those questions so that we can have a smooth evening. And then we can talk about each other later on. And the Zoom is yours.
Okay. Thank you, Karen. Thank you very much. And I can say that it is my great pleasure and honor to speak with you, Erika Dreifus. I've been a subscriber to your amazing newsletter, The Practicing Writer, for many years, and also to my Machberet. And you'll tell everybody about those in a bit. Your website describes you as reader, writer, teacher, and literary advocate. When I checked out your website, it was kind of hard to know where to begin this interview because there was so much stuff on it. So I figured I'd just zip through your biography, hopefully not leaving out anything important, so our listeners can know where you're coming from. I found out that you were born in Brooklyn, so was I, and that you logged many years at Harvard. From the BA through the PhD, mostly but not entirely in literary pursuits. Along the way, you participated in many literary workshops and writing groups. You also earned an MFA in Queen's University of Charlotte. You have taught in Harvard, Lesley University, Cambridge Center for Adult Education, and Baruch College, CUNY, City of New York College. You were on the boards of the Artists Against Anti-Semitism and the Leo Baeck Institute, and are a fellow of the Sam Rohr Jewish Literary Institute. You have played an active role in the nuts and bolts of the publishing world. From 2014 to 2017, you were part of a team to start a publishing company. During the years 2017 through 2019, you did literary consulting and independent book publicity services. And if that's not enough, along with all of this, you kept writing and your connection with Jewish sources grew. I hope I didn't leave anything out. I probably did, but that's okay. So please tell us about your published books.
Well, first of all,
Erika,
thank you. That
over
was
to
great.
you.
That was a fantastic introduction. I don't think you missed very much at all. And I just want to say, first of all, thank you for hosting me. Thank you for inviting me, Karen. And thanks to all of you for being here today. Really, it's an honor for me. I have followed your group for a while. I'm on the friends mailing list, I suppose. I'm not eligible to be a member, so that's how I sort of follow along, and I enjoy the publications. I really appreciate them very much because, as I think we've already been saying, connection is so important, and I feel so connected to all of you in Israel, and your communications help me nurture that. So thank you. And also, I know there's just so much news happening all the time. I mean, I was saying before we got started, I was telling Anne and Karen that if I weren't talking to all of you right now, I would be watching I-24 News English, and I would be waiting for the announcement, the statement coming from the families of the 4 women who are thankfully back home. But so here we are, and I'm grateful for that opportunity. So I will speak very quickly about my 2 books, which I think some of you already know about. So the first one, or the older one, is Quiet Americans. And it's a short story collection that was published in 2011. So, it's getting up there in years, but thankfully it seems that it's still finding new readers. And it's really appropriate to mention it today because tomorrow is International Holocaust Remembrance Day. And this is a book that's very much inflected by my own identity as a grandchild of German Jews on my dad's side. My paternal grandparents were German Jews who fled Europe in the late 1930s. They actually met in New York. They met and married in New York. They were, in their early 20s. And so the stories are sort of grounded in their histories and experiences. And as you go through the book, it is in more or less in chronological order. You sort of get more, I think you might be able to glean insights into my own perspectives on this, on being a descendant, on having some of this history. So that's Quiet Americans. And then Birthright is a book of poems, which was published in 2019, and actually it opens with a poem about these same paternal grandparents, but it really expands the idea of legacy, all sorts of inheritance, and as the title would suggest, birthright, which includes not just family history, but also just, what I feel I was born into, being born to my parents at the time I was born, the place I was born, as a woman, as a Jew, and part of it is also the textual inheritance of Judaism. I mean, I mentioned that because I think it will be of particular interest to all of you, in that there are a number of midrashic poems that really are deeply rooted in the Tanakh, which is, of course, our real birthright, right? So that's just a little bit about the books. And also, there are also poems here about this sense of peoplehood, the connection with Israel. I think that may interest all of you as well.
What I found very interesting was that it said in your website that a portion of each of these books' royalties was donated to a specific cause. And it would be nice if you could tell us a little about that, because I think it's important, You're
Well,
saying
thank you.
thank you to the sources.
Right, exactly. Well, and again, I'll just say that there you can find out more on the website. I even have specific within each section on each book, there's a page about each of those organizations that I chose. So the first one, for Quiet Americans, I chose, and I for those I get royalties on a quarterly basis, so I'm able to make small quarterly donations to the Blue Card Fund, which is an organization that was established in the 1930s and did help my grandparents, for instance, and continues to help elderly Holocaust survivors and their family members who have need. So that is an organization that the sales are not great. So, spread the word because the more I sell, the more I can donate. And then for Birthright, I chose the organization Safaria, which I'm sure many of you are aware of. It's this online digital library of Jewish texts that's always growing. Now, I have to say that, and not just I think because of its age, but I mean, Quiet Americans has done better sales wise than Birthright. So I know it's hard to get books in Israel, but if you know can swing it, it's always helpful. So
They're on Amazon, aren't they?
yes, but
Okay.
I know still I know like ordering and postage and everything's.
Yeah. Well, okay. So like I was impressed by that, and I also kind of thought that it went together with you're producing, I don't know, in being the person who started the practicing writer in my Machberet, because each of these highlights opportunities for other writers. This is also a giving kind of thing. Please go into detail about these things. I know that I owe the practicing writer a debt.
Oh, wow. Thank
Yeah.
you.
So tell us
So
about them.
let me start by saying that the newsletter did not start out being completely selfless, but I'll get back to that in a moment, just in case not everybody's aware of what we're talking about here. If you go to my website, there's a tab that says blogs and newsletter, and so whenever you don't have to do it right now, but you'll find out more about all of these things if that's where you want to look. So so the newsletter started out, I would say, part very generous and part very selfish. And the selfish part was that we're going back to the end of 2003, beginning of 2004. The newsletter is actually about to celebrate its 21st birthday. And at the time, I had just graduated from an MFA program in creative writing. I was still teaching. I was doing a lot of adjunct teaching. I was trying to build up a freelance writing practice and hoping to eventually get a job teaching creative writing on the tenure track. But I needed to sort of market myself. I mean, I really did need to sort of advertise the classes I was offering and so on. But the sort of other piece of it was that I've always been a researcher, and that's why I was in school for so long, and I still do a lot of research. And I love sharing things. I mean, that's sort of my service. Other people are very hands-on and go and tutor and do all sorts of other activities. And a lot of what I do is very, quiet behind the scenes. And so sharing it is important because that is, I hope, a contribution. But at the time, listservs were very popular, and my creative writing program had a listserv, and I was sharing all of these opportunities that I was finding for myself too. But I thought, well, all these other writers must want to hear about it too. But honestly, some people said, enough already. Like we don't want to be on this listserv and just hear from you all the time about these opportunities. So I decided to start an opt-in service, and so that was sort of another reason that began. So that was the start of the practicing writer, and over time, some of the focus and content and criteria for things to be included has changed, but essentially it has, remained continuously since 2004. That's the practicing writer.
Wait,
Then,
wait, wait, wait,
yes,
wait. What I hope that everybody understands that what the practicing writer is it's a monthly newsletter that goes out that has lists of opportunities of places that you can submit your stuff. Most, if not all of them, don't charge fees. This is a criteria, and there are also here and there interviews with people.
right. I mean, the interviews, I have to say, I don't do
Ah,
so much anymore, but there was a period where I was often, because that was also an added layer of time that was involved with that. But yes, and the interviews are archived on, there's another tab on my website under resources, interviews with practicing writers. And so basically, because I've also had to change the platforms over time, the newsletter started on Yahoo groups. You can't see all of the past interviews. So there are interviews on my website as well. So yeah.
ah. Now the practicing writer is aimed at a general audience, but my machberet is
Right.
aimed at a more specific segment. Now I'm going to read a quote that I was very impressed with, that from an article. It was a remark you made in an article in Moment magazine in 2018. Okay, this is the quote. There is a solid infrastructure that supports Jewish scholarly writing, but there's a dearth of that kind of community and those kinds of resources for those poets and memorists and novelists for whom Jewishness is both personal and professional. So I take it that you felt a need to encourage specifically Jewish writers, and that's the impetus behind the Machberet, my Machberet.
So that's one impetus behind Machberet. I'm gonna have to backtrack again. And also we'll come back to that Moment magazine piece because
Uh-huh.
it's important. Um, so again, I've been doing this a long time, and some of you may remember, like there was a time when everybody was starting a blog, right?
Yeah.
And so I also, again, the newsletter, as you said, Anne, is a monthly production, but I always had more to say, or more to share. So I started a blog that was called Practicing Writing. So it sort of was an adjunct to the newsletter. And so I guess I started that a year or two after the newsletter. And I would say a year or two after that, it became clear to me that that's already then. So we're talking around 2006, 2007, that presenting my full Jewish self was going to be a little complicated to do within the general writing community framework. And I found that because I started to post some things that were getting pushback on the Practicing Writing blog.
Huh.
And I decided that I didn't really want to deal with it. I was so that I would start something else. And I picked my Machberet also. I mean, I don't have to tell all of you that the fact is that at the time I was remembering painfully little of my Hebrew school Hebrew, but Machberet was a word that always stuck with me. So there it is. It seemed appropriate. And yeah, so that's how that started, and that really took off. Seemed to get a very small. I say it's not like it ever has gone viral or anything, but a really dedicated, as like you and core audience. I mean, there are people who have really appreciated it, and that's what sort of keeps me going with that.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, I invite everybody there. Yeah, I invite everybody out there to check these things out. You didn't post links to them, but I don't think it's necessary because if you look at Erika's website, you'll see that there are links.
Yeah,
And
again, there's a tab right on the homepage for blogs and newsletter, and that should take you right to everything. So,
okay, that's great. Okay, so now this is the heavy question.
yep.
Okay, we in Israel are increasingly aware of Jews' persona non grata status in the general publishing world. We've heard about it, we've experienced it ourselves. Many of us have unfortunately been subject to all kinds of nasty stuff since October 7th. Um, Lately, you've been quite active about dealing with this, combating literary boycotts and Jew hate in the literary world. I call it Jew hate, by the way. I don't anti-Semitism. It's not anti-Semitism. It's specifically Jew hate. Okay. So could you tell us a little about, or a little more than a little, about your experiences with this and if there's any remedies that you see? And I know that there are many websites about it,
Yes,
but we
yes,
don't
yes.
know about them.
Right. Okay, well let's start let's again we'll go backwards a little bit, and here's where I'm going to mention the Moment magazine piece. And I should have actually called it up and dropped the link in there, but maybe I'll try to multitask at
It
some
was
point.
very interesting.
Do that. Yeah. So I was struck, when you initially suggested we might speak about this, that you phrased it in the sense of it being lately or since October 7th. Because for me,
Yeah.
it's been there for a long time, and I have been fighting it for a long time.
What's a long time?
I would say I date it for myself. And again, keep in mind, I just want to go through the chronology. I think for everyone, it's so important to be aware of our own individual circumstances. So for me, I was in my early 30s in when I graduated from my MFA program in 2003. So for over the next couple of years there, I was trying to, sell a novel and sell a short story collection and all sorts of things that were going on. And I also was doing, as I said, more freelance writing. I joined more organizations. In
Yeah.
2006, I joined the National Book Critics Circle, which was important because I really date it to 2006 and the Second Lebanon War, because at the time, the then president of the National Book Critics Circle was using the blog of the organization as sort of his own personal bully pulpit. And it was a highly anti-Israelist bully pulpit, very much of a bully pulpit. And so that's my initial experience, really encountering this and finding very few people willing to sort of add comments on the blog, which has, of course, it's that blog no longer appears because the site's been redesigned and so on. But anyway, that's what I dated back to that point. And over time, I have seen, the increasing, a lot of the language that we're seeing today that we find so dehumanizing and inaccurate. That's begun, the accusations of genocide are not just from this period. There have been petitions before the petitions that we've seen since October 2023. And I tried to sort of do what I can behind the scenes, talking to people I knew. There are some people I've had good relationships with, and I've tried to explain why, retweeting XYZ was misguided, if not, worse. And I was getting in touch with a lot of organizations behind the scenes when I saw problems beginning to appear in conference programming and so forth. And I think that what's happened since October 7th is that all of this has just become much more visible, much more virulent, and much more pervasive. And it's taken a lot of people by surprise. And I hear a lot the phrase of, not just in the literary sense, but people who call themselves October 8th Jews, or they'll say that they become accidental activists. And for me, I'm very grateful to have more people working on all of this right now. But my accidental activist moment probably, is closer to 20 years old, and I didn't need, the horrific events of October 7th to kind of shake me into awareness. So
I shouldn't be surprised. I mean, we all know that anti-Semitism, and sometimes it's more visible and sometimes it's less visible. I mean, we all know about restricted neighborhoods. We all know about country clubs that don't accept certain types of people. I know that with my mother, when she was, first going into the job market in, I guess, the 40s, she was told no Jews need apply, and she looked Jewish, so it was hard for her to find work. And all right, but do you feel like you have allies in this fight against evil? I don't know what to call it. Whatever, fight against this pervasive nastiness.
we have some allies.
Are there people who are willing to stand up and say, I do not support this. I say Jews are human beings,
Yes, I mean, I hear from some of them as I have become more forthright in the newsletter. I've received a number of unsubscribes and sometimes unpleasant messages back about that. But I've also received messages from people. Certainly I've received messages from other Jewish writers who just are grateful for whatever I have said. But I also hear from non-Jewish writers who want me to know that, they understand and they stand with me and so on. And so those are personal messages. There are also cases where I'm thinking, you mentioned that I am I'm part of the Artists Against Anti-Semitism organization.
I don't know what that is. What is
Yes.
that?
Okay, so it's a new nonprofit organization. I certainly know the website, but I just want to double check it. I think it's the Artists Against Anti-Semitism. It's in my, yes, the Artists
It did
Against
say the,
Anti-Semitism.
yeah.
Yeah, wait, I'm going to drop it in. But the reason I bring it up is because we have a Facebook community, and I was really pleased to see that after I had mentioned it, a writing colleague who really I've never met in person. She's actually another resource sharer over in the United Kingdom, and she's not Jewish, and she joined the group, and she's a regular participant on threads, and she engages, and she just wants us to know that she's, with us. And I have found that to be very meaningful. Of course, there are also, there are organizational efforts out there within our community. I mean, the Jewish Book Council, under the leadership of Naomi Firestone Teeter, has just been working so assiduously on this. And I know that they're trying to, reach out to allies and so forth on our behalf. So there's a lot happening that you may not see, but is there. So that is encouraging.
Okay. Now, I read a while back a post that you put up a long list of organizations that you could contact that were working on combating Jew hate. But do you, and it had there were two things in it. The other thing was the list of people who signed a petition against us.
Okay.
But I don't
Well,
remember when
okay.
and where,
I'm not sure you may be, I mean, and it's completely understandable because I'm always like flooding the internet with all of my information. So I mean, it's easy to sort of try to remember and not be able to. There are two primary documents that I have been keeping since October 7th.
Uh-huh.
And there you can find them both. I'll look up the links in a second, but again, on my website, if you go to the resources tab, there's a Jewish writing resources sub-tab. And there's a few bullet points there. And if you scroll down, one of them is about post-October 7th resources.
Yeah,
It's one very long document that's called After October 7th, and it's, readings, recordings, and other resources.
that's what
And
it
there's
was. Yeah, yeah,
there's a
yeah.
whole section there on literary, what's going on in the literary community. But there's a lot of other information there too. So that's one resource where you may have been finding some of this information. And then
Yeah.
there's another page, which I call Writers Beware. And
Hmm.
that is where I've tried to explain why there's some problems and how there are problems with some of the statements and petitions that have been coming from the literary community. And I'm trying to be very careful and provide evidence of situations coming from outlets and organizations that, for instance, I don't want to be responsible any longer for amplifying them. So there are organizations and outlets listed there that may, in fact, run a journal or a fellowship or a scholarship that charges no fees and pays their writers. And in other times, I might have included them in the practicing writer, but they're so not just biased. I feel that, the misuse of language, the misuse of evidence, or total,
Hmm.
invention, the misinformation and disinformation betray a level of professional malpractice for editors and curators that I think that, the writers who trust me should be aware of these places and perhaps not submit or otherwise support them. I'm not advocating a boycott. I'm just saying that I have noticed these things, and if they matter to you, be aware. Because this was also sort of in response to what I've been seeing. If you are in groups, Jewish writers groups online, you see people asking, where is it safe to send my essay? Or,
Yeah.
which publisher can I trust? And it's much harder actually to come up with that list because as one of my doctoral dissertation advisors said when I was trying to come up with a topic and was interested in writing about an element of silence in this historical period I was writing about, he said it's very difficult to write about silence, and it is. So but as the saying goes, when people show you who they are, when these organizations and outlets show their faces, I'm not doing any doxing. This is all out there on their social media or on, their public statements. And I'm really focusing largely on organizations. I'm not trying to, do any harm to any individual on any private level. So.
But it's perfectly fair, to say I don't support this train of thought. I refuse to support anybody that doesn't support me, doesn't recognize me as a human being.
I think that's
But
an
that's
individual choice that each writer can make. They just
can
need to have
make.
the information. And again, like not everyone, may have noticed things or had things brought to their attention. And if they're interested, at least this is one place that they can look.
Okay. Okay. The question I wanted to ask you is, from our point of view, things look pretty grim out there. Is it as bad as it seems?
My initial response is, how bad does it seem to you? You just said pretty
It seems like
grim.
the
Yeah.
world is closing in on us, it seems.
Well,
With
I
me,
mean,
maybe, but
yeah, right.
I don't know.
I have a lot of different thoughts about this. I think first of all, I mean, here I am again sitting in New York, and I am looking and thinking about all of you in Israel and all, what the mishpacha, what everybody has been dealing with. And to me, that's infinitely, worse on every level than these statements from these literary journals, and as horrible as they are. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that I was thinking this morning about talking to you today, and obviously thinking about, again, the anniversary tomorrow. And I think if you had said to 80 years ago, our ancestors thinking that we would be having this conversation, that you are in the state of Israel, I mean, that is hope, right? So there is reason for hope. Hope is in our DNA also. Hope is our birthright. Certainly, I mean, you're literally the anthem, right? So there is that. So the way I look at this, I think that there are a few reasons to be hopeful. I think that this has been kind of a wake-up call for a lot of people and a lot of organizations, and I certainly am seeing more interest from Jewish organizations in tackling this. They're starting to realize that it's not just the college campuses, and it's not just the public schools and so forth, and especially that there is a certain, I've been trying to sort of sing this tune for a long time, that there is an intimate connection between the literary community and the college campus community because of the academic creative writing
Yeah.
project, right? And so it's late, but it's coming, and so that's good. And then there's also been, this flowering of new publications and outlets for us, by our people, for our people. So I look at that as a very encouraging thing.
Yeah.
And I also feel that that this is a moment where we are seeing things more of our coming together. The Israeli Jews and diaspora Jews coming together a lot more since this trauma, and that can continue to lead to only good things, really. And so I strongly encourage everyone, wherever we are in the world, to sort of dive into all of these endeavors, and to create more of them to the extent possible. That's really difficult to do on an individual level, I know, to create something new. So there are lots of small things that we can do to help each other. There is an effort underway in a number of Facebook groups led by my colleague Lisa Weimer, who's a young adult and children's book writer, and other writers. But Lisa is kind of a special force in this, to share the joy of Jewish books. And briefly, what she's done is try to equip people with a long list of actions that you can take, and then report back on the actions that you've taken. Now, for your purposes, not all of and I'm going to put this document here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great,
Now,
great.
you don't need to report back if you don't want to. That's in these specific Facebook groups that she mentions. But the list of actions that come up here about, like rating, helping, she's very sensitive to the algorithms that are out there. So she's
Uh-huh.
really encouraging everyone, read a book by a Jewish writer and rate it on Goodreads and add it to your to be read or want to read list and all sorts of ideas like that. Very small things that don't necessarily take a lot of time or a lot of energy, and just sort of put more good, positive energy and Jewish joy, as she puts it, into the universe. And, the more of us that do that, the more good we can do for each other. And for my part, I've always made it, or I've increasingly made it a point to remind people that, half of the world's Jews live in Israel. And they don't all write in English, but many of them do. And there are many fine English translations. And that anytime any of us, in the writing world are putting together lists for, Jewish Book Month or any sort of, awareness month, include the Israeli books for Jewish books.
That's what I wanted to ask you, what can we do here to
Yeah,
to help things in other places? I
yeah,
mean, for all that it's difficult to live here, we do have a certain amount of security knowing that anti-Jew hate is not it's not the same kind
right.
of thing here.
I
So
know.
we have what to give. So,
I
you
mean,
know.
what's been sort of amazing to me, I've been to Israel twice since October 7th. And the first time was in January well, a year ago with my congregation on a mission. And we were just so floored by how everybody was so concerned for us in the United States. Everyone we met in Israel was just very worried about us. And we kind of, we're still sort of not over, not over that. Um, well, again, I think, Lisa's document gives a number of good ideas. So, for instance, um, listen, subscribe, follow Jewish book podcasts. If you're asked to recommend titles to a book club, recommend a book. Um, you know,
Mhm.
um, I don't know how the library system works there, but here where, we can suggest to, I basically end up writing to my library, I would say an average of, once a week, some weeks more than one title, saying, I see this book is not in the catalog yet. Could you please consider buying it? I mean, there
Uh-huh.
are all sorts of little things. And again, this is a very long list that's in the document. So I don't want to, I want to make sure we leave time for questions and
Yeah.
not spend too much time detailing. But again, like it's easier than it thinks. On a larger basis, what I would, if I could wave my magic wand, I would just love to see more opportunities for us to be together, not just online, but for example, a friend of mine, Julie Zuckerman, who I don't know if Julie's on today or not. If she is, hello, Julie. um, so Julie runs this incredible online salon called Literary Modine that brings together Israeli
Oh,
writers and writers across the diaspora. And that's just one wonderful thing that she's done. But last year, she really did do a lot of planning for what she called sort of a literary mission to bring diaspora writers to Israel. And unfortunately, it just couldn't happen because the price, it was you couldn't get enough enrollment, I think, at the time, in part because the price was very high. So if
uh-huh.
there are funders out there who want to make it possible for us to actually be in community in person. I had another opportunity this year where I was at the National Library of Israel and I was able to speak with some people. And I said, this gets back to the Point from the Moment article, like there are opportunities to bring scholars over to conduct research at the National Library. How about something for the creative writers, So if any of you have levers to pull in any of these
Yes.
spaces, there are very small actions that we can all do that don't take a lot of time or a lot of money. And then there are sort of the dream activities that perhaps as organizations or collectives or, in other ways that we can make happen. But that's, I suppose, what I would leave you with. just
Okay.
more togetherness and more learning and communication.
Okay. Okay. Well, good. That definitely seems doable. You take it
Oh,
apart and do pieces of it at a time. Okay. So good. So thank you very much. But we're not
I know.
logging off yet because
Not
now
going anywhere.
we have a bit of time for questions. So how do we do this? First of all, I'm saying, does anybody have any questions? Would you like to ask Erika? And if so,
It's on chat that we
chat. Yes. Let's see.
we
What do we got here?
begin with
Um,
those and perhaps allow them to ask questions.
sure. Well,
Last, allow the question.
does anybody have any questions?
Uh,
Yes, Wendy. But you have to unmute yourself, Wendy.
yes, and make the questions brief, please,
Yeah.
so that we can get everyone in. Wendy, speak.
Wait. I just have to Wendy, before you say anything. Helen Krieger wrote, "When do you sleep, Erika?"
I sleep, believe me. I wouldn't be any good if I didn't get enough sleep.
All
So
right.
don't
Okay.
worry about me.
Yes, Wendy. Okay. I just had to read that out loud.
Wendy, if
Yes.
for some reason you're on mute,
No,
even
Wendy is okay. She's all right. I think she took herself off mute.
but she's not getting through. She's
No, we can't
Do you,
hear
do you
you.
want to type your question, Wendy?
Can't
No.
hear you. Can't hear
I
you.
don't hear you.
I
So
can,
let's
we'll ask somebody else in the
let,
wait.
let's Wendy, why don't we have Fran here?
Fran has a question.
Ask ask a question.
Hi. So thank you, Erika. I'm a very regular reader of your newsletter, and I've been published through your newsletter, and I have a list every month that I write down the sources, because then I write next to them safe, Erika Dreifus, because it's just such a poisonous world out there. So thank you very much. I'd like to ask you, I mean, because I'm more of a British voice, and I research journals in England as well before I submit. And some of the stuff I see makes my blood curdle. And, I want to know how we inform you when we see this hatred. Like, there was one journal I was very interested in submitting to. I'm not going to name it publicly. And they chose as the winner of a poetry competition a woman who was at the demonstrations in Colombia, boarding up the hall and threatening staff there, and she wrote a poem about it, and that was their winner. I was so disgusted, but I didn't quite know how to let you know about that without kind of just, I didn't know if you want to hear about all this horrible stuff that I come across, but I feel like British writers, it's really hard for us as well. I mean, we
Yes.
do, yeah.
Well, I mean, if you look at my list on Writers Beware, I'm pretty sure you have. So you've seen that it's not limited to American journals. I'm certain there are British and Irish and Australian journals and Canadian journals on there. So I would say that the organization that is, again, there's an organization that's more powerful and more resourced than me, and that is the Jewish Book Council. And they have their reporting anti-Semitism in literary spaces email, which I've linked to on my Jewish Writing Resources page. So you should be able to find it. And they will take all these all count, all of what you experience as well, to borrow Anne's word, Jew hatred, but they put it as anti-Semitism. You can report it to them. If there's something that's not already on my list that you think I should know about, you can write to me through my website. But to be on, let's put it this way: there are other organizations and journals that I may personally not want to send my work to or support in ways, but have not come out with statements that I have seen that I can link to. It's very difficult to just say, well, this is a terrible, hateful poem and they shouldn't have published it. that alone is not going to be enough for me to put something on the list.
Yeah, that's
You
why
see
I
what I'm
asked.
saying?
Yeah.
Because that's, you know, it's just different. I can't explain it. It's sort of a, you know, it's more an art than a science, this whole thing, if you know what I mean. But I would say that the Jewish Book Council is certainly a place to report things. They are collecting all of this information, and they might be able to give you some guidance.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
Sure.
Wendy wrote, many members of the British Society of Authors resigned because of a very inappropriate resolution, which was totally beyond the remit of the SOA. I guess that's Society of Authors.
Authors, right.
Out of this came a WhatsApp group of Jewish writers who are doing as much research as possible to expose the anti-Semitism against writers and artists. Your link to the American organization could be useful. I think that's as far as it got. Yeah. Yeah. Right,
Okay.
Wendy?
Well,
HS, I know.
I didn't know about that WhatsApp group. I did follow what was happening with the Society of Authors, so that's very interesting. And if anybody representing that WhatsApp group wants to be in touch with me, there's a contact mechanism on my website. So
Okay. Hillel Schenker has a question. And he's very politely, he put
Yes.
a hand
he
up.
raised his
Put up
hand.
my
I
hand
see.
and I also wrote a message, right?
Yeah.
Well, what strikes me is that today is January 26th. It's just 6 days after January 20th. And so I was wondering, there hasn't been any mention of Trump or all the Christian evangelicals or Elon Musk. And I was wondering how you feel all of that affects everything that you've been talking about.
Yeah, that's a good question. This actually also gets back to the essay from Moment Magazine that I'm gonna try to call up if I remember right after I speak with you. I want to address your point first. But there's something that I quote in that essay, which I'm going to paraphrase it now because I can't remember exactly. And it's from a scholar and writer, David Schraub. So again, this was published in 2018. And it has to do with this anti-Semitism from the right and anti-Semitism from the left. And I think that a lot of us are less surprised or less, I don't want to say less unsettled, but to sort of see things coming from so-called Christian nationalists and so on. We've seen all of that before, and that is certainly dangerous in the sense of, I think the way the writer put it in what I quoted is that, the side that's more likely to put a bullet in my brain is that side, right? But what seems so urgent to us about dealing with this other sort of bias is that it comes from these communities that so many of us grew up in terms of where we were educated and where we've been working and where we do our writing. And it just seems that we expected better from this side, so to speak. And I think that's why there is so much focus on it. But look, I mean, I think if you read a lot of work by Jewish writers and a lot of Jewish publications for that matter, there is no dearth of attention to the threats coming wherever they're coming from. I mean, I think that's there, although that to be honest, they just don't they don't have as robust a literary community over on that political side. So
Yeah. Okay, well, I don't know. It feels like a betrayal is what it is. It's not only
right.
the stuff that these things are happening, is that there are so many Jews who devoted their lives to so-called liberal causes. They voted Democratic. They marched with people of color or whatever people call themselves these days. Equal rights. People believed in that stuff, and then it turns out that the Jews, some are more equal than others. That we're excluded from the general definition of equal rights for all. Of what is it? Diversity. diversity, inclusiveness, and so on, you know?
DEI, diversity,
Yes,
equity, and
yes, that should apply
inclusion.
to everybody, but it doesn't apply to everybody.
And those,
Everybody, and it feels like a betrayal, you know? That's it. Are there any other questions?
I see there's a question from
There are other
Michael.
questions on the chat. There's
Yes.
Okay.
Michael's asking if I can comment on the state of the
Yes.
publishing industry or death of the publishing industry.
Yes.
I mean, I would refer you more to, again, the thing about me is that if I don't know the answer to something, or I don't feel that I have the best answer to something, I will always try to find you the person or sources that can. And I am not an expert on the publishing industry, but I do follow people like on Substack. Kathleen Schmidt is somebody who knows a lot about the publishing industry, or Jane Friedman. There's a couple of different Jane Friedman in the publishing world, but I think it's janefriedman.com is where you can find a lot from Jane Friedman. And, you know, there are a lot of things going on in the publishing industry. I get the daily newsletters from Publishers Weekly, and I try to follow it from there, but I don't have a lot to say about the industry. It's life, death, or life in between. So.
Okay. Well, so
have you had a lot of information or writing from Israel? Have Israeli writers been in contact with the American publishing industry? Because we haven't seen much. And although there are a number of writers in Hebrew who are translated, and there's writers here, I don't know whether they're getting to any audience that needs them, that needs the information from here.
So are you referring to people with published books or Israeli writers?
And Israeli writers in general, books.
I mean, I do see Israeli writers. Again, I'm pretty active in a number of Facebook groups, and I do see people sharing experiences and asking for advice and so forth there. I do think it would be great, you know, we don't have, you know, I'm trying to think of if we have sort of a single community where everybody gathers, and I'm not so sure. I don't know, unfortunately.
But have you been exposed to more Israeli?
Well, I have, certainly. I mean, I make a big effort to do so, right? I think that, again, you know, if you go back, if you go back to Lisa's list, as I'll call it, you know, she suggests signing up for newsletters and updates from places like the Jewish Book Council or the Association of Jewish Libraries and so forth. And I think that a lot of these places are doing more. Certainly the Jewish Book Council, you know, they announced their awards this week, and among the awardees were a number of Israeli authors and titles. And that point was even made in, you know, some of the news coverage about the awards. So that is one thing. On the children's book level, I follow the Society for Children's Book Writers and Illustrators Israel chapter. And I try to stay informed from them. I get your emails and so forth. I just think that, you know, the more that people realize that the information is out there, and if they are willing to sort of, you know, connect themselves to it, you know, they'll be able to do more to offer support and amplification. But I certainly have tried to take, you know, what I have learned, not just in the last year or 15 months, but over time, because I really feel like I'm continually, I'm in a lifelong, you know, continuing Jewish education course of my own, and sort of, you know, add it so that I'm on, you know, the bookshop platform, which is sort of an Amazon alternative with independent bookstores, allows you to make up lists. And I've, you know, made up lists for Women in Translation Month. I really made it a point of including Israeli and other Jewish women writers from other languages, you know, not to amplify the Israeli writers for sure, and also to remind people of the, you know, the really rich diversity of Jewish literature, which is multilingual and multinational and, you know, so much more, you know, incredible than a lot of people, you know, who bother to think about it, you know, consider Jewish literature to be. So.
Okay. Well, okay, I think that's all we have time for now. So,
I see one question that's asking me to comment on
oh
translating
yeah,
Hebrew,
okay. All
especially
right.
poetry. And again, I am not an expert on that, but one person who I do think knows a lot about both translation and poetry and Jewish literature, including Hebrew literature, is my friend Avia Kushner. And she has a Substack that you might want to check out. And she's also the language columnist for The Forward. So lots of information on all of those things from her.
Uh-huh. Okay, so I'm not cutting anybody off. There are other questions?
Yes, thank you. I see Ziva. By the way, I'm going to say Ziva Bukai has a wonderful new novel out. So go look that up. It's called The Anatomy of Exile. But Ziva has mentioned that there's also Nora Gold's JewishFiction.com that publishes worldwide Jewish literature, but not poetry, Ziva. That's why I didn't mention that. So.
Okay. Okay. David, you had a question? But you have to unmute yourself.
As a son of German Jewish people who managed to leave Germany, I'm just curious to know where your family was from in Germany.
Well, all right. The short answer is
And
that
one more question. Did they speak German between themselves when they got to America, or did they?
yes,
Yes.
they did. So both of my grandparents, although they came from very different backgrounds socioeconomically and so forth, they were both from the Baden area. My grandmother's family had been in the town of Lichtenau for a long time, but she was born in Mannheim, and that's where she came from. And my grandfather came from a very small town called Altdorf. And they did speak German in part because after the war, my great grandmother, who had managed to get out of Germany, went to Brazil, finally came to New York and lived with them, and my dad, who was a toddler when she arrived. And she really never learned English. So they all spoke German at home. And then as my sister and I were growing up, German was the language that my grandparents and my dad would speak when they didn't want us to understand.
Yes.
So
So my German is very, very, very minimal, my own German.
as is mine.
Okay.
But
Okay.
This has been an amazing a talk, and I hope that we will have a chance to speak with you again, and after we've caught up now that we've got
yes, there's so much to read.
there's so much to do, and I hope that we'll be able to do it, and I hope that we'll be able to help in some way and to be helped.
And yes, we want to help. I mean, I know many of my friends over here want to be able to help all of you and everyone in Israel.
The connection will be good for everyone.
Come and visit.
No?
Well, when you come and visit here, we'd love to invite you, and we'll come and
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much. Oh, there's Judy. I can't hear if she's saying something, but hi, Judy.
Yeah, joined us, and I'm sure she's not. I'm sure we got the time wrong.
Okay.
As we all do in these wonderful sessions.
Right.
I really want to and really wants to thank you too. And I want to tell speak to all of you. I hope that you can keep talking amongst yourself about this subject after Erika, I'm sure, has to leave. So
Yeah, well, I can stay a couple more minutes, but have we stopped recording?
You can stop recording. I'm seeing a lot of messages.